Today I am a new person. I live in the presence of God and I have never been so happy. Those who experience His glory, those who truly see God in action can never go back to the same life as before. I know that many times we carry such heavy sins that we think we will never be forgiven, but God is love and mercy and He forgives even the most lost. But I need to tell you something serious. God showed me that there is a sin that is taking many souls to hell. This sin is destroying lives, destroying families, and it is because of it that the world is the way it is. Jesus asked me to be a spokesperson for Him here on earth. He sent me to bring a message and I will tell you, but first, let me tell you a little about myself. My name is Rose Mara. They call me Rose. I am 42 years old today. I was not born into a Christian home. On the contrary, my childhood was hell. My father and mother were always drunk, fighting and shouting. I would huddle in a corner and cover my ears, but the screams would always go through the walls. My older brother would hit me when no one was looking, and my only sister, well, she was the only one who still tried to protect me. Today, she is the only one in the family I still talk to. We would go hungry. I remember spending entire nights crying on an empty stomach, begging for bread while my mother slept on the floor after drinking beers, but there was a neighbor. Oh, that woman. She would always show up with a plate of food and, more than that, with words that warmed my heart. She would talk about Jesus. She was the one who took me to church. For the first time I felt a peace that I had never felt at home. The church was a refuge, but I didn't really understand what faith was. I sang the hymns and listened to the sermons, but when I returned home the nightmare continued. All I knew was that that place was the only place where I felt safe. I wish I had stayed there forever. Inside that church where everything seemed lighter, where the voices didn't scream at me, where no one hit me, but life doesn't let us run away from pain that easily, and when we think we've suffered enough another wave comes and sweeps everything away again. Tragedy knocked on my door in a way that I will never forget. My mother, that only woman that I know, died at 35 years old of an overdose. I was just a child when I saw her body lying on the floor of our filthy house, her mouth foaming, her eyes open but lifeless. I didn't cry, I couldn't just stand there staring waiting for someone to do something, but it was too late. My father didn't even show up at the funeral. He was already in jail, for robbery, drug trafficking and attempted murder. That was the legacy he left for us, and as much as I hated to admit it, part of me felt relief that he was far away, but another part was filled with shame. What I was going to say when they asked about my parents, how could I explain that I was the daughter of a criminal and a woman who died with a syringe stuck in her arm? Hatred grew inside me like a weed. I hated my father for everything he did. I hated my mother for having been abandoned in that world of pain, and above all I hated myself. But there was someone I didn't hate, God. Although that life led me to hate Him, I didn't hate Him. On the contrary, I loved Him. I had God as an imaginary friend who I told my pains and frustrations to, and He listened to me. I saw Him since I was little. I saw God. He was my age. He was a beautiful, sweet boy, at least I think that's what I remember. When bad things happened, I would go to my room and call for Him, and He would come talk to me. Well, He never said nothing, He just listened to me. But everything bad can get worse. When we have this mentality of pain, we think like that, right? That's when the worst happened. My brothers and I were taken by social services. I remember the day as if it were yesterday. An old car stopped at the door and a serious woman told us that we needed to go with her. I grabbed my sister's hand, but it was no use. We were separated and thrown like old packages into different shelters. I never saw my older brother again. My sister took years to find her again. Adoption seemed like a hope, but we soon learned that hope wasn't for children like us. Every time couples visited the shelter to choose a child, we stayed there waiting. But no one wanted black children who had already grown up and were marked by their past. They wanted babies. They wanted blank pages, and we were a book full of torn pages. The rejection hurt more than the hunger I had felt so many times. I looked at others being taken by smiling families and I wondered what was so wrong with me. I was just a child, A child who wanted to be loved, but the world had no love for me. Back then I didn't understand, I just knew that my life was a big mistake, that no one wanted me, that I was alone. But today I know, today I understand that God was watching me, that even in the darkest days He was there, I just didn't see Him yet. When I turned 18, the shelter couldn't support me anymore. They simply gave me a bag with some used clothes and wished me luck, but I never had any luck. I had nowhere to go, I had no family, I had no one. It was then that Leonidas appeared. He was the caretaker of the building where the orphanage was located, a simple 45-year-old man who always treated me with respect while many looked at me with pity or contempt. He knew my story of abandonment, of rejections, and even so he never tried to take advantage of my fragility. On the contrary, he took care of me. It was him who gave me a home when he found out that I had nowhere to go. He offered me marriage not out of love, not out of desire, but because he was sick with cancer and wanted to make sure I had a roof over my head so I wouldn't go hungry. He said that the house and pension would stay with me when he was gone. I accepted, not because I loved Leonidas, but because for the first time someone was giving me something without expecting anything in return. In the first few years our relationship was just friendship and care. I took care of his health from his medicine appointments, and he took care of me. He taught me about life and how to get by in the world. He never touched me, he never disrespected me. We only had intimacy when I was 20 because that was when I wanted it, because the affection and gratitude I felt for him turned into something greater. From this union Odara was born my daughter, my greatest wealth. When I looked at that little face for the first time, I knew I finally had a reason to continue. Leonidas lived another 8 years, time enough to see our girl grow up a little, to teach me everything she could before leaving. When he died I inherited the house and the pension, and for the first time in my life I had a real home, something of my own, something that no one could take away from me. Well, what I'm going to tell you now, I'm very ashamed, I regret bitterly, I don't forgive myself for what I did. In fact, I didn't forgive myself, I mean, because my encounter with Jesus brought me healing of wounds so deep that today I can say I'm free and cured. You know, Leonidas was the only one who reached out to me when no one else cared, and still I betrayed him. He died without ever knowing that while he was fighting cancer I was in the arms of another man, a young man of my age who made me feel alive in a way I had never felt before. At first I tried to resist. I knew it was wrong, but the temptation was stronger. Leonidas gave me security, he tied me with respect, but there was never any passion. And when this young man appeared saying everything I wanted to hear, wanting me in a way that no one had ever wanted me before, I gave in. The worst part is that even though I felt guilty, I continued. Leonidas left without knowing about my betrayal, and that is the cross that I carry to this day. After he died, I thought that young man would stay with me, but he soon disappeared, and that was when I met Mario. I thought I was starting a new life that would be different now, but I was wrong. Marrying Mario was the worst decision of my life. He seemed charming at first, but after we made our union official, he showed his true face. He humiliated me. He attacked me, made me feel small, and that was when I realized I had married a version of my father. The same man that I had always hated was now sleeping next to me. I separated from him. I could not allow my daughter to grow up seeing that man mistreat me like that. I know how much a ruined home harms a child's mind. She never called him dad even though she was so young. She had the maturity of an adult. She always told me, "Mom, Mario treats you bad. Daddy liked you more, right?" That left me completely disoriented, and I thought I need to make a decision. And then I looked at Mario and saw my father's face, the same cold eyes, the same cutting words, the same violence that I swore I would never accept again. But there I was, trapped in a cycle that seemed to have no end. I hated Mario, but deep down I hated myself even more for having chosen someone so similar to the man who destroyed my childhood, my father. I spent my life trying to erase him from my memory. I never visited him in prison. I never wanted to know if he was alive or dead. For me, he had already died the day he was arrested. I wanted to forget that I carried his blood. I hated every feature of my face that reminded me of him. I hated the fact that I had the same last name as a criminal. For years, I wished he would really die. I imagined the day I would receive the news and feel nothing else but relief. But life has a strange way of confronting us with what we fear the most. One day, without expecting it, I heard a rumor that made me laugh in disbelief. They said that my father had changed his life inside prison. He had found God. I didn't want to know. For me, that didn't erase anything he did. Just look at the irony. I lived inside the church since I was little. I never strayed from the church. Even when I betrayed Leonidas, I was in the church. I knew about the sins, but I was dominated by them, and I heard a lot about forgiveness in the church. I was moved. I even cried during sermons, but I couldn't forgive my father. Do you know someone like that who lives in the church but is dominated by sin, by pride, by arrogance, by lack of forgiveness? That's horrible. Well, going back to my story, as time went by, the news came that I always hoped to hear and that for some reason didn't bring me the peace. I imagined my father was dying, hospitalized, without strength, on the verge of death, and even so I didn't want to see him. But God started to bother me. I tried to ignore him. I tried to silence that voice inside me, but no matter how much I tried to run away, something deep inside me told me that I needed to go. I just didn't know if I would have the strength to face that man or to face myself. The call came in the morning. The hospital said that my father was on the verge of death and that before leaving he had made a single request: he wanted to see me. They decided to grant that wish since he didn't have much time. I heard the voice of the nurse on the other end of the line explaining everything calmly, waiting for my answer, but I already knew what it was. "No, I won't," and I hung up the phone, and felt a knot form in my chest. The hatred I carried was old, deep, from years of abandonment, pain and humiliation. He had never been a father to me, so why now, at the gates of death, should I be a daughter to him? I passed the day disquieting, with a malaise that did not come from the body but from the soul. The air seemed heavy, as if something invisible was crushing me. I cried all day, but I didn't even know exactly why. Odara tried to comfort me, wiped my tears and spoke affectionately. "Mom, you'll see, he's dying. You need to do this." But I refused, angrily, resentfully, with all the bad things I had been carrying for years. At night, exhausted from crying so much, I bent my knees to pray. I asked for strength, I asked for understanding, but deep down my heart was still closed. When I finished, I lay down. I closed my eyes, trying to escape from everything, but before I could even sleep, I saw that my soul had been ripped from my body. Suddenly, I was walking through a beautiful, white and golden tunnel, shining with a light that didn't burn, but embraced my heart. It was filled with peace, and I knew that I was going to heaven. But when I took another step, something happened. An abyss formed before my feet, a separation that prevented me from moving forward. If I tried, I would fall into the void. Despair took over me. That's when I saw Jesus. He was in the other side of paradise. The light around him was so strong that it hurt to look, but at the same time I didn't want to look away. Then he said, "You can't come in here. If you want to come in here, you have to leave your luggage there." Where in the world? My heart raced. How come I was so close? The Lord, I have nothing with me. I am only wearing the clothes. He looked at me lovingly but seriously. "You carry a burden too heavy here. You can only come in if you leave your luggage in the world." I didn't understand what he meant. I wasn't carrying anything, but then Jesus pointed and I saw my father. I said, "What did he have to do with this? He is my child now." Jesus said, "He repented, confessed with his mouth that I am his God. Now you need to leave your luggage because your time has come, but you are not allowing it." My heart sank. "How come, Lord?" Jesus sighed, "My daughter, I have seen you. I have probed your heart. You are in the church, but you are one step away from hell. Not everyone who says to me, 'Lord, Lord,' will enter the kingdom of heaven. You have sinned so much. You asked me for forgiveness and I forgave. Now your father needs your forgiveness to leave this world and you do not want to release him." These words cut me like a sword. "My daughter, you have never been with me. You have never allowed me to heal you. If you do not forgive your father, I cannot forgive you." Pillars. I have always been a Christian, but at that moment I understood I had never truly forgiven, and without forgiveness I could not enter heaven. It was then that I screamed with all my soul, "Father, I forgive, I forgive." Jesus smiled and said, "Go tell him this. He needs to hear it to rest." Your forgiveness is his passage to eternal life. And before me his powerful image disappeared before my eyes. He still said to me, my daughter, you understand now, you have just broken your pride. I did not answer, I just cried because deep down I already knew the answer. Pride has taken many souls to hell. People sin, but they think that whoever sinned against them does not deserve forgiveness. You were forgiven so many times and yet you denied forgiveness to your father. My heart clenched. I had never thought of that in this way. The enemy uses this against you. He whispers in the ear of my children, you were humiliated, do not forgive, you were hurt, so hold a grudge, and so he drags multitudes into the darkness because grudge. He hardens the heart, and a hardened heart cannot hear me. The Lord's words were like fire burning inside me. You think you were fine, but you were on the edge of the abyss. You were in church, but you were never with me. You prayed and sang, spoke of me, but pride was still your Lord. My tears fell uncontrollably. Forgiveness is not about who deserves forgiveness, it is about liberation. You did not realize, but you were a prisoner of your own grudge. While your father was behind bars, you lived inside an invisible cell. It was true. For years I thought I was free, but my heart was chained. Now you know, now you saw Jesus. He came close and touched my face with love and said, go and testify. Tell the world what I taught you. The world is full of people who refuse to forgive. Many are not for murders, not for heinous crimes, but because they allowed pride to consume them to the point of refusing to forgive. My heart raced. Pride is a seed of hell, and lack of forgiveness is the fruit that condemns. I trembled before the truth that he revealed. Tell my people to loosen their chains. Rancor is a weight that drags souls to the abyss. Forgiveness is October. I sobbed. What the enemy fears most is not a Christian who prays or preaches. He fears a Christian who forgives, because the one who forgives destroys the chains he tries to impose. Jesus looked at me one last time and his voice came as a whisper loaded with power. Now go and never look back again. And then the vision began to fade, and Jesus left me there looking at the sky. I saw golden angels, and huge flower fields, crystal clear waters, an indescribable peace. It was the place I always dreamed of being there, and that I almost lost it because of my pride. After that vision I couldn't sleep anymore. I spent the rest of the night praying to Jesus to allow my father to live until I could go to him. The next morning I went to the hospital. When I arrived, the doctors allowed me to go in there. He was too thin and fragile and unrecognizable, but what shocked me was his face. There was a peace I had never seen before. He knew where he was going. I approached the bed and for the first time in my life I looked into his eyes without hate. He looked back at me, my eyes filling with tears. I forgive you, I whispered. He cried and sobbed almost without strength, but he smiled. That night the phone ranged. Your father passed away. I didn't cry out of sadness, I cried because I was finally free. From that day on my life changed. God put a fire inside me, a desire to tell this story, to warn people who like me were trapped in pride and resentment. Pride and offense are weapons of the enemy to drag souls to hell. People sin and think that whoever sinned against them does not deserve forgiveness, but Jesus showed me without forgiveness there is no heaven. Today I give this testimony because I know that there are many people listening who carry this same burden, and I say let go. Let go. Don't lose eternity for something that only has weight here on earth. Jesus taught me the value of forgiveness. Now I teach you, and before I finish I want to leave this message Jesus spoke to my heart, and I want to tell you pride and lack of forgiveness are deep wounds that bleed the soul, and no matter how much we try to ignore them pretending we are fine, the pain never goes away completely. It corrodes, hardens the heart, makes us prisoners of ourselves. I spent years carrying a weight that sank me without realizing that the key to my freedom has always been within my reach. Jesus showed me this in a way that I could never deny. He forgave me so many times. He saw me fall, make mistakes, promise to change and fail again, and still he never turned his back on me. But I, who was forgiven countless times, denied forgiveness to my own father. I believed that he didn't deserve it. But Jesus made me see that forgiveness is not about who deserves forgiveness, it's about freedom. If you were rejected, betrayed, humiliated, I know it hurts. I know that looking at certain people brings back memories that seem impossible to erase, but forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means that those memories no longer have power over you. that you no longer carry the weight of them. Forgiveness doesn't force anyone to rebuild bonds that were destroyed. There are relationships that will never be the same again, and that's okay. Jesus doesn't ask you to pretend that nothing happened to you. He just asks you to release that burden. And because why? Only those who are free enter heaven. I saw it with my own eyes. We take nothing with us from this world, not riches, titles, not even the emotional burdens that we insist on carrying. Jesus told me that many souls are lost because they hold on to resentment as if it were a right, but in reality it is a prison. How many people today live imprisoned without realizing it? So I ask you, is it worth it? Is it worth carrying this weight? Is it worth losing your peace, your communion with God, your salvation just to sustain a pride that will one day become nothing? Today I am free, not because I forgot what I lived through, but because I chose not to allow my past to determine my future. And you have someone who needs to forgive the one who hurt you so much that you feel hatred, resentment, to the point of thinking you can't forgive them. Are you holding on to this pain, or are you going to let go of this burden and finally rest? If this testimony touched your heart, the channel is them. Just subscribe. Leave a comment. I liked leaving a comment like this. YouTube understands that it is relevant and delivers it to more people. Do your part, take the word of God to more afflicted hearts and share it. May God bless you too.